In this episode of the Decentralized Opportunity Podcast, I'm joined by Christopher Aumueller of FanWord. Hey, Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Tanner. Good to be here.
Unfortunately, Wyatt wasn't able to make it this week, but I know that we're going to have a fantastic conversation because I'm really excited to learn all about your world, especially as it comes into sports. And I guess the first question that I want to kind of bring up, because it was something that I really didn't understand, was what is NIL and the NIL industry?
Yeah, so NIL stands for name, image, and likeness. And what it essentially stands for, at least in our industry, is a rule change that took place on July 1st of 2021. So roughly 2.5 years ago, which essentially changed rights for college athletes in the sense that they can now monetize their name, their image, and their likeness, which is something they weren't previously allowed to do. So if you were a company and wanted to ask a college athlete to endorse a product of yours on social media, the athlete wasn't allowed to do that, right? Or if an athlete wanted to sell merchandise or host a camp or something, they weren't allowed to do that and essentially make money off of their brand, off of their name, image, and likeness. And that's essentially what has changed again roughly 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, because before then everything was amateur, right? I remember hearing those stories where people would get in trouble because their uncle or cousin got a kickback for going to this school or for doing this thing. I guess what kind of spurred the change? Like how did that all happen? I'm just really curious.
Oh man, like I don't know how much time we have, but
All the
um,
time.
there's a lot of cases like legal cases that are often kind of considered the starting point of those rule changes. You'd have to talk to a lawyer to get probably the best answer for all of this, but it really came down to just pressure to some degree on the NCAA, which is the governing body of college athletics, that almost forced them to, in order to protect themselves, make those changes. And yeah, I mean, nobody really knew per se that they were coming 2021 in July, but there were a lot of people kind of behind the scenes working on it. And then, roughly a year and a half before they actually took place, people started, hearing some noise and prepping for those changes. But it's a combination of a lot of different things, Tanner. Yeah.
So this NIL industry is essentially brand new, just a few years old. So can you kind of tell me how, well, I guess first let's start with what does FanWord do in that industry? Like what kind of solution do you provide? And then I'm curious, how did you come about getting into it since it all is so brand new?
Yeah, so I guess maybe just to be very correct, the name, image, and likeness industry isn't per se new. It has obviously it's
Oh.
been a thing in professional sports for like
Mm.
decades, but it is new to college sports and actually by now also high school sports, where high school athletes weren't allowed to monetize their name, image, and likeness either, and those rules have started to change on the state level, and then it's just continuing to trickle down. But as far as our company FanWord is concerned and how we kind of fit into the space, so we've been around for way longer than NIL in college athletics, and our whole and I can give you obviously the backstory if you care about it, but when I started the company, it was really driven out of passion, a little bit of frustration, and I really wanted to build a company that would help humanize athletes and help people understand that they were more than just numbers and stats, and help athletes just earn a little bit more of the spotlight that didn't always get the recognition I felt like they deserve. So it was very like, again, I'm a former athlete. I'm a former college athlete. I played tennis for the Huskers, so I had so many friends that did phenomenal things, were phenomenal human beings, but all people really cared about and talked about was their on-field performance, for instance, right? And that was something that, I mean, back then, no idea really how to build a business per se around that, but it is something that drove me and that I wanted to do. Like if you fast forward a little bit, you can kind of define it as athlete branding or brand development is kind of probably the most overarching term of what we do, and that has always been relevant in athletics as a whole, helping athletes build their personal brand, market their personal brand, helping them tell their story, et cetera, et cetera. but the product market fit prior to name, image, and likeness just wasn't as, as big as it is now with name, image, and likeness, because there was always a ceiling, right? Athletes were never able to really take their brand to that level that, allowed them to monetize. There was always this kind of ceiling, and that disappeared. And now, when those NIL rules have changed, helping athletes essentially maximize opportunities just became almost a, or is a requirement for a lot of institutions to stay competitive, in recruiting and some other areas in college athletics. So they have to essentially help their athletes navigate that space and succeed in that space. And that's really where our products now and our solutions now really come into play. And maybe just one more sentence as it relates to name, image, and likeness. So at its core, name, image, and likeness is about monetizing athletes' brands, or athletes monetizing their brands, I should say. We don't really do that, right? So our whole thing with FanWord is we build products that essentially help athletes get there or amplify that commercial interest. So anything we can do to humanize these athletes, increase their visibility, market them, et cetera, that's us, right? So we get them to these points. If you're run a business, we're kind of like the marketing department, right? And that's kind of how we look at it and where we kind of fit into that space.
So what I love about what you're saying about your history is there's so many people that will start a business because this new industry, this new opportunity opened up. It's like, oh, I'm going to jump on this bandwagon. But with your story, you're going to what I think is much more important and powerful is you actually recognized a mission and a problem that was independent of just market conditions, but something that you were truly passionate about, which is these athletes and their story. And then from there, you're really building a quality product that can, as industries open, can take advantage of those. So that's fantastic. And I do actually really want to hear about, can you kind of tell me about the story of how you originally came up with the idea? Love the origin story, the initial sparks of the ideas that you had, as well as what was kind of your catalyst for taking that idea and bringing it into a real business. Like, I want to flip the switch, make this a company, start really building things and take it professional in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, happy to give you that story. Just to address one other a quick thing, and we can talk about that later too if you want. But
Hmm.
there were a lot of companies, to your point, that the moment this industry opened up, they just started building a business because you had some industry experts, what's the word that I'm looking for? Calculate the market size of that NIL space to be almost $1 billion in year one, right? Which is a big number. So you had all these companies kind of flooding the market, and a lot of them are not even around anymore because it was much harder to get market share and to really build a business around something like this. There were a lot of, and again, there's a lot more to it, but for me and for us, it has always been about the long run. It has always been about being a very mission driven and really impactful company, and we were not willing to kind of change that and cannibalize that for the sake of potentially a quick dollar. And truthfully, we also saw a bigger market opportunity with what we were doing, because what we do complements what everybody else really wanted to do, which is help these athletes find deals and find partnerships. You know, we started becoming a potential partner for them because we helped market what they did. We helped drive traffic to what they were doing, and all that is to say, I appreciate the kind words of what you talked about, and yeah, just want to confirm that. Yeah, regarding my story, yeah, or how we started FanWord. As I mentioned, I play tennis for the Huskers. I'm originally from Germany, so came over here in 2008, and I've always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial block for sure. So starting something per se wasn't, completely out of the blue. Like, I've always had, some small entrepreneurial gigs, even as a teenager growing up. I had a graphic design community back home in Germany that we kind of grew to a really large one back home, and just stuff like that, right? So I've always had a passion for building something, but As I mentioned earlier, like sports, obviously, and just athletes in general that I got to know, the friendships and the community just fascinates me, and is something that I wanted to leave my like my mark on, to be honest with you. And it took all the way until 2016 or 2017 when I first, you know, like again, I was a self-taught graphic designer, so I started putting together a few mock-ups of websites. And back then, it was actually a mobile app for college sports fans. So we pivoted in 2018, but back then, that's how it all started. Started pitching, a concept in class while I was getting my MBA. And I remember Sam Nelson. He's the director of the Center of Entrepreneurship at the University of Nebraska here in Lincoln. He was one of my first mentors, and I remember, telling him a little bit about my idea before class. He's like, "Yeah, you just got to talk about it and get a start." And I was so paranoid that somebody would steal the idea, and I had friends sign NDAs. Like I was a real idiot back then. But yeah, I was really passionate about doing it, right? But I started putting these mock-ups together, and I got to a point, all right, like, are we going to give this a try or not? And if so, what does that look like? And I come from a very, very medium income, family back home. And I told my parents about it, and my grandfather. And yeah, one day they're like, giving me a loan for, I think it was 18 or 19,000 euros, which was a lot of money. I paid it all back, right? But back then, are you doing this or are you not doing this, right? So I did. And no interest, by the way, but I still paid it back. And yeah, paid a developer back then to kind of put a a prototype out there. And that's how it all started. Made pretty much every single mistake that a first time founder makes. Hence why we ended up pivoting too. But yeah, to answer your question, Tanner, it was really just a passion piece. It was always entrepreneurship in general was always something that I was drawn towards. And it was like a little bit of a, yeah, why not kind of story too. And I feel like you regret the things you don't do possibly a little bit more than the things you do. And at this time in my life, I was still in school. I was still working on my PhD actually back then, which I never finished. But back then I was still in a PhD program. So I had a backup, for the lack of a better word. I wasn't like all in right from the get-go, one day at a time.
Yeah, I really want to get into the lessons that you've learned, but first, I'm really interested in how FanWord really works because it's a little crazy to me that maybe I have a high school like cousin, or you could have a nephew or something that could be signing brand deals or all of this different stuff. I mean, again, it's a new world in so many ways, moving from what was only amateurs to now being professionals. But it's crazy. So I'm curious, like, how does FanWord work? How does it provide those different pieces of value? And just kind of give us the overview of all the different pieces.
If you really want to look at it from a high level, we have two software products. And we are a B2B company. So we sell to athletic organizations, and the athletes are essentially the users of our products. And we have a storytelling product, which is essentially us producing content and stories about athletes. And there's a couple of other variables to that product where we create social graphics and white label brand landing pages for those stories. And we essentially build an entire content series for some of the institutions that we or organizations that we partner with, and help the individual athletes that are part of it tell their stories. And we do that in a very unique and authentic manner. So that's one of our products. And the other product is essentially a nationwide athlete directory where every athlete gets to build his very own or her very own mini website. Almost think of it as a massive curator and aggregator of pretty much everything about the athletes. So the whole concept here is to give the athletes like a single link they can use to market and promote themselves, and to show all the fans and supporters the different ways they can connect and collaborate with them, right? So they would list links to their social channels or previous deals they've done, articles about them, their degree, accolades. They can upload a resume, photos, videos, that kind of stuff, right? So, and we sell both products to athletic organizations and primarily to collegiate athletic organizations. So we do some stuff in high school sports and in professional sports, even some international sports. do a little bit of stuff with brands as well that want to work with college athletes. But our biggest footprint, without a doubt, is in college athletics, where we work with roughly 50 schools nationwide.
Yeah, I was curious how much that would break down because, like, for college, I imagine it's a really good way for their athletes to again gain exposure if they want to take things to another level. But also, I'm sure it's very valuable for them in recruiting people to want to come to their school, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, NIL really touches almost every single area in college athletics. There are rules you have to follow, so compliance is involved. There's a lot of brand development and personal development, so student athlete development, which is an area in college athletics, is involved. Communications, content, digital is involved. Sponsorship side is involved by now to some degree. So all that is to say, it really has a massive impact, and particularly the big schools. I guess you would still call it Power Five, maybe Power Four schools by now. So it's the largest schools essentially in the country. So if you read anything about an NIL deal of a college football player or a college basketball player, and you read like really big numbers, that's usually from one of those big schools. They definitely have to compete on NIL services and NIL support for these recruits and these athletes. And by now, you have these athletes. Like if you're a high school recruit and you're one of the top recruits, it matters, right? It matters to you, and it's just something you have to look at. So yeah, you're spot on. I mean, sure, you help your athletes, which benefits the athletes, but in return, it does help the institutions, whether it's just from a recruiting angle or for instance, what we do really at its core simplifies and amplifies kind of like how athletes and their supporters connect, right? So you strengthen that relationship between a fan and an athlete, for instance, which in turn can make that fan more loyal. Can maybe have that fan buy another ticket to a basketball game or to a attend a gymnastics meet because they read a story about a gymnast that their little daughter just started following or whatever. You're making stuff up, right? But there's more to it than just helping our athletes make money. It definitely impacts the schools and the individual teams as well.
I was going to ask too, what are some realistic goals or like things that you could expect by going through one of these NIL products for the athletes themselves? So, if it's someone that's in high school, what benefits could that get? Someone who's in college, those and I mean we can always talk about like, oh, the big brand deals and those things, but I'm curious, what is the reality of what an average, solid athlete is going to get as a reward for using these types of programs?
Yeah, I mean the great thing is that it's really kind of like an empty playing field. So of course, the college football player for Nebraska has a bigger audience, a bigger platform, and therefore the deals that come into his inbox, for instance, are numerically speaking bigger on average than they are for a Division 2 track and field athlete or tennis player or soccer player or whatever. But there are thousands of athletes, tens of thousands of athletes that aren't playing for one of those high profile programs and are absolutely crushing it in the name, image, and likeness space. It all comes down to, how much you're willing to put into building your brand. That's really what it is. Like if you, and granted, if you are again a college football player for the Huskers and you're really good, you may not need it because yeah, you have so much of a profile, so much visibility that by design, like you have that exposure that brands potentially look for when they look for athletes to work with. But all that is to say, everybody can do it, and it's not something that happens overnight. So you have to, sooner you buy into building your brand and really becoming a creator on social, for instance, and engage and learning that, the more you can benefit from it. And you will, if you kind of do a little bit of research, like if you talk about a median deal size, it's actually really low comparatively speaking. It's like less than $100. But there are again tens of thousands of athletes that make 4 or 5 digit deals or annual income, and just because they hustle and they want to do that, right? And if you really want to build a brand that you can monetize, I'm 100% convinced that everybody can do it. And that's, I think, the beauty of that. And it starts though with them understanding that, which is a hurdle, sometimes, because they are like, they read about, again, the college basketball player at Duke signing a $50,000 or $100,000 deal, and they're like, well, I don't have 60,000 followers. I'm not playing basketball for Duke. This doesn't really apply to me. And maybe not, right? But nothing prevents you from making $5,000, $10,000, or just learning life skills that will benefit you for the rest of your life. Of, financial literacy is a big conversation topic in name, image, and likeness, or learning how to, read basic contracts, learning how to negotiate, how to communicate with a brand, how to act professionally on social, and build your brand and really think about it from that angle. And not everybody wants to do it, which is perfectly fine. But I think the big story that needs to be communicated is that everybody can do it. That's really what matters.
In so much of your messaging, you talk about storytelling.
Mhm.
And how does that actually take place, and how important is that to building your brand, and how does it all work? Because again, I think a lot of people, when they think, oh, build my brand, I'm going to post some images, I'm going to do whatever, but they don't really have an understanding of what it takes. So how does storytelling incorporate in all those pieces?
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those broad terms, and just like, again, the term brand, right? Like, everybody thinks about it a little bit differently. We always think about it like if we have to separate the two, the brand is always something that's kind of external. How do people perceive you, and kind of look at you, and that kind of stuff, versus your story is something that you define, right? That's internal. And how you tell that story, I mean, there's so many components to that, but that is entirely different for each athlete. And social, of course, plays a big role, but it often starts with kind of like an internal process of, okay, what kind of story do I want to tell? Like, I'm sure you've all heard the saying of, well, everyone has a story. And we always say, no, everyone has thousands of stories, like hundreds of thousands of stories. And you have to pick and define what kind of stories you want to tell, and then how and when and where, right? There are all these variables that starts with kind of like almost like some sort of strategy, right, of how you want to do it. And it sounds a lot more complicated than it really is. At the end of the day, you just got to start, right? Like, okay, I'm a tennis player from Germany, with passion for helping athletes and entrepreneurship. All right, those are the things I want to talk about. What does that look like? Okay, I can post photos about me playing tennis. I can post photos about, the early days in the first office, building a company. I can do videos of talking about the first idea that, like, whatever. There's just stuff you can kind of do. But um, at the end of the day, it's about just getting the word out, and connecting with your audience on something that matters to you and that defines you. And authenticity really is the key here, of just be yourself. I mean, you're a human being, and people want to connect with human beings. Like, don't try to make everything look, perfect and as good as it can possibly look, which obviously is a bit of a challenge on social sometimes. But be authentic, be the real you, showcase your struggles, showcase, if you're comfortable, obviously, showcase what you're passionate about. And the more you do that, the more often you tell those pieces of your story, if that is something that you want to do, the more people will associate that with you. Like, if you're passionate about graphic design, post some, like in my case, right, start posting a little bit about some of your work and what goes behind some of that stuff. Show some, how tos, and whatever else. The more you start doing that, the more the audience will follow you and connect with you over that work. And if that is something that is part of your story and something that you want people to know about you, the reward will come with time, right? If you now connect with, I'm making stuff up, Adobe, and you're like, hey, look, I love designing, and look at all the stuff I've done, and they kind of look you up, and they see on your Instagram feed that you post every week, you post, I don't know, a design of the week, you know, that is they know that you're starting to build an audience and something that actually matters to them, right? That's kind of how we encourage athletes to think about this, if they want to think about it from a monetary angle. Build something that you're passionate about before, just mass outreach to dozens or hundreds of brands. Like, they want to connect with your audience. They want you to have an authentic connection to the brand and the product that you're endorsing, for instance. And it starts with just doing that without any sort of monetary compensation. Going a little off track here, I know, but it's all part of storytelling, I guess. It's a long-winded answer of it's a long process.
No, I love the idea that we don't just have one story, we have thousands and needing to pick the ones that matter, right? I think of it all too many times that when people are forced in somewhere or feel obligated that they need to be posting, they just pick stories that are boring because that's what it is. I see that especially on platforms such as like LinkedIn, where
Mm.
all of the stuff, basically ChatGPT could have wrote it or probably did write it, and
Yeah.
there's no authenticity or soul to it, like you're saying. So, is that one of the common mistakes that athletes are making? Kind of going into it, is they're just posting or portraying themselves in the way they expect that the world wants them
Yeah.
to rather than being themselves?
Yeah, spot on. I think there's a lot of bad messaging out there, I think, and some of it has, merit to it. But I mean, just think of yourself as a fan, like the folks that you follow. Like, why do you follow them? What do you enjoy about following them? Is it, learning about, behind the scenes stuff? Is it about, them being personal with you? Is it about them posting every day and you can open up Instagram and seeing, I don't know, whatever that may be, but just think of that from your angle, right, as a fan, rather than a creator. And sure, if you're not super comfortable doing something but you want to do it and you want to get better at it, it may look a little inauthentic at first, and that's okay too. But don't force yourself. If you don't want to do it and people tell you you got to do this, you have to do that, don't do it. I mean, it's really not worth it. It's got to feel, again, authentic to you and something that you enjoy. And if none of that is given, then yeah, you can tell in the content for sure.
Can you share some of the tracks or stories or ways that you found people have had the most success? Because again, you think about with all those different deals and opportunities, what are people doing that has really worked and actually been somewhat that metaphorical jackpot to get them extreme results?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the athletes that have bought into, being vulnerable and really like finding a niche too that they are passionate about, they definitely stand out. Again, like you have to be a little careful because again, if you play football for Michigan right now and you just win a national title, it doesn't really matter how much you talk about, right? Like people will want to work with you, and it all depends on the brand too. For instance, what are their goals? Do they just want to affiliate with a lot of followers and reach? Therefore, do they look for something very specific? And it all depends, right? But for sure, athletes that are willing to be transparent with their community and really spend and invest time on building that community, so it's not just posting a piece of content, but really then engaging with the comments and interacting with others and their followers and their fans and their supporters. It's tough to beat that, right? And particularly again, if you found a niche, there's athletes that are, for instance, very very passionate about women's rights, for instance, right? They constantly talk about stuff like this, and try to open dialogue and conversations, and they advocate for that. Super powerful, super strong the way they do it, right? But find something that really drives you, and if your sport is the only thing that drives you, that's okay too. But I mean, if you're a brand, like always think about it from that angle too, and you can pick between 500,000 student athletes, for the lack of a better word. Why should they pick you? Figure out a way to stand out to them, and why you should be the first athlete that they want to work with. And there are so many ways for you to do that, and you know again, often just picking a niche and honing in on that, and being vulnerable and authentic is a very 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 good one.
Well, one thing that comes to my mind is the concept of around 1,000 true fans, right? Because you were talking about how, like, with Michigan, if you're on a winning team, they'll kind of follow along and they'll want those pieces, but those aren't your fans. Those
Hmm.
are Michigan's fans. And
Yep.
then when you stop playing, they're
Mhm.
unless you're moving on to another big team that they rarely follow you. But if you actually build your own fan base, then that's what's going to, move with you as you progress along in your life and your career, and they'll follow you along. And that's where you provide extra value to the brands for any sorts of like collaborations or deals, things, right?
Yep. You are 100% right. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I love that. Like again, finding your true voice, finding your niche, so you can find those very specific people. That's the other thing, I guess, too, is if you're too broad in what you're talking about, then you have no way of standing out because then you're just competing with everybody. But if you find that very specific things and keep drilling down, I know this is a concept in sales too, where if you're I don't know, it's like a meme where if you're selling online courses and you're trying to just sell to everybody, no one's ever going to
Yeah,
buy it. But if you sell to like very, very specific things, it's like, oh, lawyers for restaurants in this area in this market. Well, you can charge a lot of money for those because if you your content's gonna be very specific to them and provide a lot of value, and
absolutely.
they're gonna want it.
Same thing in that space, 100%. Yeah.
The last little thing, I'm on your website here and I see FanWord Coach. So AI tools. That's been a huge thing in our world. We've talked about it on many different episodes. What are you seeing in the world of AI? How are you guys able to use it? And what's kind of your read on what is actually going to happen here? I know it's nearly impossible to predict stuff because
Yeah.
there's new stuff with AI all the time, but what seems to be the theater and what seems to be the reality?
Oh man, yeah. I'll try to keep this short because I feel like I've been answering your questions for far longer than I should. But I'll tell you like kind of like the main use of AI, or how we wanna really embrace AI. Like AI in our industry too is a little bit of a scary word, just like it is in many others, I guess. And the way we utilize it and continue to build around it is AI being kind of like your friend, and being something that can help you simplify and speed up your work, and absolutely never, by no means, replace your work, right? Or replace you, I guess. And because that is the big concern. Like, is AI, like, if you are a communications director in college athletics, is there, AI just gonna do the job for me? We build tools using AI that will simplify the life for a communications director, for instance, right? That help them streamline, an interview process, or creating a draft for a write up or something, right? And we build very, very unique AI tools with that mindset and mentality to save these people time, to save the department as a whole time. These people that we primarily serve within college athletics at the institutional level, they are often very, very overworked and understaffed, those individual departments. And we want to support them using AI tools. Now, there are AI tools that will come in handy for the individual athletes as well. But for the most part, the way we use it today is as a complement to some of the other tools they already use, and just simplifying some, like the administrators, and just simplifying their work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot more, like you're saying, it's a tool for leverage,
Mhm.
rather than a replacement mechanism. So is that where you're kind of seeing where different programs will be able to reach a lot more people utilizing these type of tools, and then the same for the athletes, they'd be able to actually go reach out to different, schools if that's what their goals
Yep.
are, or different sponsors or different
Yep.
programs, all those different pieces.
Absolutely. A lot of our AI tools revolve around content creation, right? Simplifying that, speeding up that process. Again, right now, for the most part, for administrators, but then also, for athletes at some point as well. And you're spot on. Like, that is just the scary part, I think, about AI, is that people need to be educated how it's being used, right? Like, when NIL became a thing, it was the same. It's new, right? It's different. People are just, but I mean, AI isn't new. It's just like, maybe with the rise of ChatGPT and stuff, people are just, having a different understanding, I guess, of it. But nothing will ever replace, or at least not in our case, in the way we utilize it, the work of a human being. And that's by design. So it will potentially require a little bit more education, for sure. But yeah, you're spot on. That's how we approach it and how we build it, not for a school, for instance, to replace somebody, but giving them, tools that can help them simplify their job and speed up their job.
I want to go back to entrepreneurship and those pieces. You talked about you've had some pivots and you made some mistakes. So I'd love to kind of dive into things that you assumed when you were starting the company that turned out not to be real, And then what are some of the pitfalls and roadblocks and stuff that you had no idea what were coming, but you ran into them and you want to help somebody who's early in their career so they don't make those same mistakes?
Oh man, oh man. Like, I mean, you still make mistakes every day, and
Yeah, oh
I
yeah.
think it will continue to be the case. I think one very very good learning lesson for me was, and I think I'm just gonna use that as an answer here. When we first launched FanWord, when we were still that mobile app, it was essentially a social networking app for college sports fans. I did a really really, like, not even a poor job, I guess, but just an uneducated job of building a business model. My business model back then revolved around traffic. Hey, we have a cool app, we build a cool product, people will come, people will use the app, and then we can monetize that traffic. I didn't educate myself, A, what it takes to build traffic to a point where you can monetize it, and then B, I guess, how much traffic you actually need on a mobile app or on any sort of platform so that you can monetize it, where advertisers go, all right, hey, this is cool, this is interesting, that kind of stuff. I didn't know that. I was just a little bit, hey, we did a little bit of a survey with 100 kids or 100 people. 98% said, hey, they would love an app like this. Cool. Awesome. We launched the app. And as part of marketing the app, we were starting to tell stories about athletes, which is, full circle how we ended up with the pivot. But back then, it was just a marketing vehicle to get people to download our app. First story we've ever done was with a Husker volleyball player. And I will never forget this. We posted about it. Within 10 seconds, Husker volleyball retweeted it with, I don't know how many followers they had back then. Don't quote me on this, 70,000, 80,000, but it was a big number. And I remember still, like, to this day, I was sitting at home and I was like, holy buckets, Husker volleyball retweeted this. This is going to be awesome. um, Two people downloaded the app from that shared post that Husker Volleyball did. And that was one of those aha moments where I was like, holy cow. Like, if we have somebody like, and sure, could have been a matter of how we convert them from like, I mean, it could have been all sorts of different issues, but the end of the story was that it is so much harder to get people to download and use an app than I had initially anticipated. So all that is to say, I think a good story or a good lesson is to really be mindful and do your research as you start to build a business model, right? For once, and then also in my case, and this is something that I like to, I help mentor some students that are especially in those early stages, and especially the ones that try to build tech products and all that good stuff. Hacking it, like, is there something, is it like whatever you're trying to build your business around, can you test that without building, for the lack of a better word, right? There's not sure if you've ever heard of Product Hunt, for instance, which is a
Hmm.
platform. Okay, perfect. Product Hunt started out as a newsletter where people just kind of curated, product ideas that they learned about, and they started building a newsletter off of that just to kind of test taste and interest and an appetite for what we're doing. And there like there's always, most cases at least, or in a lot of cases, there's a way for you to test your assumptions and your theories before building product, raising money, that kind of stuff. And I wish I would have known that back then, because there was a lot I could have probably, done much better back then, and costly mistakes that I could have avoided. But that's a lesson that I'll always remember that for sure.
When it comes to, you brought up, different challenges. I'm curious, is there anything unique to your story that is somewhat unique to Nebraska here? Because again, so much of what we love to feature on this podcast is people here in our community here in Nebraska. They're actually doing things on the level that they are doing over the coasts.
Mhm.
But there's certain unique dynamics to being in Nebraska that there isn't in being in California or being in New York and those things. So, what was your experience kind of getting stuff built here compared to, if you would have done it somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't have the comparison per se, so I can't
Right.
necessarily speak what it's like to build in Chicago or on the coast or whatever. What I can say though, and which is one of the many reasons I just absolutely love this community, is I mean, just the access, I guess, to people and resources. I remember when I first started out again, Sam Nelson was a big mentor of mine. I mean, he just kind of like continued to be a sounding board for me, without, I mean, he didn't have to do that, right? Open Doors, actually the market leader in our space, ironically, the two founders are good friends, and one of the two founders was one of my first mentors, Blake Lawrence. So having access to him, like, from day one, really invaluable. And just as you kind of ingrain yourself in this community, like just realizing how accessible people are and how genuinely they want to support you and see you succeed is really remarkable. And again, I can't speak to other communities, but I wonder if that's the case, and maybe the West Coast or whatever, where things maybe are a little bit more competitive, for the lack of a better word. He has a lot about, I think, collaboration too, and I have a lot of friends here that build, and we message each other so many times with questions about X and Y, even though we're in different industries, building different companies. But it often feels like your success is kind of like my success, or Nebraska's success is or our success. I love that mindset. I love that community. So that is definitely something I think, and that's kind of who I am as a person too. So that's why I think I feel very, very comfortable here, with the people in this environment, because yeah, people genuinely, I feel like, wanna see you succeed, and help you, and that's awesome.
One of the criticisms that I hear a lot from people, or not criticisms, but worries, I guess, is that they'll get a lot more collisions and connections and all those stuff in in San Francisco or in LA or in New York or in Austin. And they're just worried that there's not enough people here. But what you're saying with, and it resonates so true to, how my story has been, it is that the people that you do have here, you do build a much, much deeper relationship with. So I would be curious, and I'll kind of test this as I talk to more people about seeing, yeah, you might have a bigger network being over there, and you might have some extra access to potential co-founders or some talent, for your team to join. But are you getting that same breadth of depth that you
Yep.
would be here in our community? It's a really interesting point. I'm gonna mull on that for a while, Chris.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it's a great aspect, and it also probably depends a little bit on what you're trying to build. I mean, does it help you to have access to multi, or to tech founders of billion-dollar companies, for instance? Is that the sure they can maybe share or not, maybe they can share advice that a lot of other people can't, but especially as you start out, I mean, is that what every founder should shoot for, right? Like building the same thing. Is it okay to build a $1 million company, or a $5 million company, or just a lifestyle business, right, where you make quarter of a million a year, and take home $100,000? Like, what's your goal? Like, what kind of business are you really trying to build? And then for the relationships that you are building, like, how much does it help you to connect with other lifestyle business owners more than then having, maybe again, access to a tech founder who again runs a $1 billion AI company. And I don't. This is hypothetical, right? So I don't have a yes or no answer here, or a particular opinion on it. But the depth the relationship that you build here, and that constant access to people, like, it doesn't just feel like, hey, can I have 10 minutes of your time, and then I talk to you again in 6 months. No, like, this is an ongoing conversation a lot of times, where you do see each other fairly frequently, where you do message each other fairly frequently, and yeah, that goes a long ways, I think.
Just to expand on that, if you had access to somebody who, let's say, had a huge exit at a tech company and is now a billionaire, you're really not going to get any more time than you would maybe even just talking to them on Twitter. I mean, really, you're not going to get that super deep with them, or maybe you go to the same events and you can have a conversation, but to the same degree, it's what I've found is, again, the community aspect here in Nebraska, or just the Midwest in general. You really build tight relationships, and
Yep.
these are the people where if you have a problem, you can text them and you know that they're going to answer you. If you something happens, you need to have a lunch or you need to get together, they'll make time for you.
Yep.
And if you really have some deep problems, they'll go out of their way.
Yeah.
to really help and support you.
Yeah,
So
and I do think it's interesting. I mean, it's all about the balance, right? Like, I mean, do I enjoy talking to somebody who has a successful exit and has reached a level that I may not ever reach? It's fascinating to me, and they do have pieces of advice that I can 100% apply in my business. But to your point, I won't be having access to that person every week, right? Like it's all about the right balance and what you are really trying to build. So
yeah.
yeah.
And it's important too, I feel, to also really surround yourself with peers that are around the same level of you,
Mhm.
because they're going to share the same problems that you have. If you
Yeah.
go to somebody who's, let's say, retired, let's
Yeah.
just put it in that context, they're not going to they'll remember when they were doing that grind, but they're not actually doing it. The dynamics have changed. So of course you want to have that type community. And
Yeah.
like you're saying too, I mean, there's just something about the depth. And I'm going to test this because I talk to people all the time, so I'm going to see how truly deep their roots go in some of their peer groups and their friendships within these, or are they well connected, but it's all surface level. So
Yep.
I think it's a really neat hypothesis that we can kind of dive
Yeah,
into.
let me know what you find out.
I definitely will. So, well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We're ending our time here. I guess if just to wrap up, can you tell where people can find you online?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me, Tanner. I really enjoyed this. Very, very active on LinkedIn. No AI generated posts. I can assure you that. So yeah, just my name, Chris Aumueller on LinkedIn. Same thing, Chris Aumueller on Twitter. Those are really the only two platforms that I use, but LinkedIn most active.
All right. Well, perfect. Yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And then I just want to thank everybody else who's made it to the end of the episode. Make sure to, go follow Chris online. Make sure to like and share this podcast. We have been growing each week, which is just fantastic. So really starting to get a little bit of momentum there. So let's keep that going. And then with that, I guess we'll see everybody next week.